welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I'm really excited to be ending the year with our good friend Diana Otero coming to us from Bloomerang. Hey, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I was teasing you, kind of, sort of, not really, in the green room. You come to us from Indianapolis, and I think, as they say, Indy is really one of the thought leadership centers in our country of nonprofit theory and tech and startup and innovation. Um, it's just riveting. People have no idea what is going on in Indianapolis, and from tech startups to the venerable organizations such as Bloomerang, it's pretty innovative, don't you think?
I think so. I mean, it's an exciting place to be. We have the Little League School of Philanthropy. I talk about it quite a bit of like I live very close to our Bloomerang headquarters in Indy, and just from my house to the office when I walk in, I pass by three nonprofit organizations. So it's great. Indy's a great place for them.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Well, I think Bloomerang has been one of our founding partners and educational partners since we started. And when I think about the trajectory of what has gone on and the innovation and how you as an organization have really opened your arms up to other groups and other businesses and other leaders, I think this is a great place to bring you in to talk about year-end best practices, because I feel like you all are doing it, and it's even more exciting because I feel like you're in an environment where it kind of helps you with your brain, if you will, right? You know what I mean? You're not sitting there in a vacuum.
Yeah, we're so immersed on it. I love talking to our different nonprofit customers. I love just volunteering with the
Mhm.
nonprofits nearby. So it's really nice to hear, like, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what are those challenges and what are the things that work for them too during this time of year.
Right, right. It's so powerful. And, sometimes when we are in the middle of it, it's really hard to get that clarity to step back and to even have time or take the deep breath to figure out what just happened. I mean, this year's been a whirlwind. And all of a sudden, we're saying, okay, the year is up. We're going to end with gusto. And it's pretty astonishing. So I know you're going to help us, Diana, get it straight and get it going. Another group of folks who get it going for us are our presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, our new shows on Fridays just dedicated to fundraisers and all the heavy lifting they do. Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that really join us day in and day out. Again, I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. This year in 2024, we have crafted this amazing co-host panel. It's a best practice here for our organization. These folks come to us from all over the country. They're all in the nonprofit sector, but they do incredibly different and diverse things. They are really amazing thought leaders in their own right, and it's really been a joy to get to know them. Just like it's been a joy to have Diana Otero on before, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Bloomerang. Okay, my friend, what does a senior product marketing manager do? Not just a regular marketing manager, but a senior.
That's kind of funny, but yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, really, it's all about making sure we're making those connections to all of you and helping our organization tell the story of Bloomerang and how we help nonprofits. And the way I get to do a lot of that is by speaking to a lot of you because we want to hear from you and we want to listen what your pains are, what your goals are, and figure out how we can help with that. So really kind of product marketing is just making sure we're listening to you and our solutions provide what you need.
So I've got to ask this question because I feel like this in 2024, I think a lot of folks were like, okay, we're kind of through the worst of the pandemic. We're going to just be dealing with the reverberations yet to be discovered or, kind of navigating through that. Then we have this general election, which is somewhat contentious and, has a lot of repercussions. Um, and then in the middle of it, we're in the nonprofit sector, still trying to do our, achieve our missions and doing everything. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what the tone and the tenor has been when you have been listening to, the nonprofit partners that you work with.
There is a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people are worried, but really it's just about keep doing what you're doing, right? I mean, you have built those relationships with your donors, your supporters, and that's really something to draw back on. There, you don't necessarily have to do anything new just because there's a lot of changes in the world. You
Mhm,
have those loyal supporters. So there's been a lot of anxiety, and
mhm,
there is a way forward, and we're all in this together. So it's
mhm,
just a matter of reminding each other, reminding ourselves, and reminding each other of that.
mhm. It's interesting, Dana, because that was like kind of one of the voices that we heard at the start of the pandemic. It was, again, you used that great word, uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty. And so people were like, either lean in, go hard, and really just, hunker down, or pull back and wait and see, what's going to happen. And so it's a fascinating thing to be talking to you about a year end where I feel like that behavior kind of could have been the same. Are folks going to lean in and pretend like no matter what happens as we finish up a general election or an administrative transition, still doing your work, or that, okay, I need to pull back and wait and see? I'm wondering if you could give voice to that. What are your thoughts? Like, what are you seeing?
I think that's very interesting. I think a lot of times I like to take the cue from your supporters as well,
Mhm,
because there are rumblings there and they might be saying things, but are we listening to that? The same way that I like to talk to our nonprofit customers, have you had some of those conversations
mhm,
with your donors, with your supporters? Because you might be at a different place than they are, and it's good to get that aligned to see where they are. You
mhm,
will have those supporters who will support you no matter what, no matter what the climate is. And there may also be some supporters who aren't feeling the same uncertainties that you are. So it's
mhm,
important to acknowledge that and meet them where they are so that you can head toward that common goal. So if you haven't done so, maybe have some conversations with some of your key donors to
mhm,
take the temperature of where they're at and what they're thinking.
mhm. I think that's great advice because, a lot of times we can assume that a donor or a philanthropic investor, large funder is where we are, right? And they're just responding to our work versus something a little bit deeper or different. And so I appreciate you kind of giving us the temperature on that yourself. So let's talk about some best practices going towards this year end. These really, I think, are best practices throughout the year, but we're, kind of saying, okay, if we have to just focus in on a couple things. And this is an interesting thing for those of you watching. We have a picture of a gal looking into a mirror and she's seeing herself. And we're going to be talking about personalization, like we see you. For those of you listening, I want you to envision what you might see when you look in the mirror as a donor. So talk to us about, how do we personalize this, Diana?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to personalize it, right? There's the simple things of like using the names and the merge fields. So
Mhm,
at the very basic level, you know who you're talking to. I mean, I've gotten some of those letters sometimes where it's just like current resident or
mhm,
dear supporter, right? It seems very impersonal and doesn't make me inclined to give to that organization. So, one, at the very simplest level, using the donor's name is a great way to build that rapport. But what I really like is having to go deeper and really calling back to those past support, right? If you
mhm,
know that this donor has given to a particular program or a particular campaign, it's good to call back to that because it does a couple of things. One, it reminds them of how and why they've given in the past. And two, it also shows that you've done your homework and you really know who this donor is. If
Mhm.
I'm just getting a generic appeal, I'm more likely to respond to that more personalized appeal, talking to me about the things I care about, than a generic appeal that doesn't quite resonate with me or I don't quite have that connection with. So, doing that little bit of homework of getting to know your donors, what they care about, really helps toward that. And when we say personalization, it doesn't mean one on one necessarily, right? You
Mhm.
have a group of donors who might share a common interest,
Yeah.
and you can call back to that. It's not just like, oh, there's going to be so much work if I have to personalize this for the
Mhm.
hundreds of donors that I have. Look at what those commonalities are and talk to that group about that.
So, Diana, getting into the meat and potatoes of this, the first commonality would be the spectrum with which that donor is been investing with you financially. Are we talking like the top 10% of our donor base, the top 30, the top five? Like, what does that look like?
I like to think of it as, for example, these are your one-time givers, or maybe they've just
Okay.
attended an event and that's where their particular interest lies, versus you have a group of recurring donors and they give on a monthly basis because there's a particular program that they want to keep going. So
Right.
things like that. So it's not necessarily amount per se, but what do those things tell you about your donors and
Mhm.
what they're interested in with your organization?
Mhm. Super interesting. This is not what I thought you would say. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I thought it would be like, don't use Mr. if you can use Ms. or, I really thought it was going to be more, if you will, humble or basic than that, because it seems to me like this is a donor data uh, issue. And I'm going to call it out to be, it's generally a mistake, right? It's sloppy work. The number of things that I get to Mr. Patrick are exponential. Or to Patrick, my name's Julia Patrick, but a lot of times it's like they've assumed that's like my first name or it wasn't coded correctly. And then to your point, as you started off at the beginning, it sets a tone and you're like, they don't know me. They don't care. They're just doing something pro forma.
Yeah. I like that point too. I mean, at least I think at this point that's pretty basic now, of at least know the pronouns, know if it's a Mr. or Miss, know if it's the first name or last name, but how can you take that basic and up level it, right? So you have those salutations, right? What else can you do to make it more personal?
Right. I love that. And I love that you use the word up level it because it moves it from task management to really more of a strategic process, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
one of those things, I'm a data nerd, so make sure before you even do all of this that you have all your data correct, and that really gives you a good foundation of being able to personalize at a deeper level beyond
Mhm.
the basics.
Yeah. I love that you bring us forward to that because also to me, it just seems like it's a better approach to understanding your engagement with your donors as opposed to the ATM model. Like, oh, if I send out an e-blast, then I'm going to get so much,
And
right?
it brings such a wow factor, right? Like, you got my name right, great. And now you know what I'm interested in. Like, even better. Yes, I want to keep supporting that thing I've supported
Yeah.
before. Yes, I want to keep that going. So, builds that rapport, and that personalization is really wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's just a real clarion call to how you should be looking at this information and how you should be thinking about it, and really drilling down as we said, in a more strategic way. This was another thing that you brought up, and I teased you in the in the green room. I was like, what? This was kind of a lame idea. But then I was like, wait a minute. This is scary because a lot of times we look at our website once or twice, we're like, okay, it works, and then we're done. And we never go back to really how it's working. And then so shame on us, and then we miss these opportunities. So talk about how we can optimize our donation pages and what does that really mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny, we were just talking about, oh, I thought we were going to bring it back to the basics of using the right salutations, but this is, level deep. So I'll talk about it this two ways, right?
Mhm,
One, your forms, that's kind of one of those things you kind of set it and forget it. You build it once and then you test it once and it's working once,
mhm,
it's working great, and you think everything's fine. And we never really go back to it. So
mhm,
at the basic level, yes, we want to make sure everything is still working right, everything's flowing correctly. You you are actually receiving the donations you want to receive. But the
mhm,
up level to this one is what you're really looking at is the donor experience, right? Because how many of us have gone back to our forms that we created months, maybe years ago, and really taken a look at what does the donor experience look like and how has that changed? There's been a lot of great enhancements now, being able to offer different payment methods like digital wallet items that weren't available years ago. So,
mhm,
are we taking advantage of things like that? That's the technical side. But also taking a look at it from the donor experience. Is it easy for the donors to make those donations? Here
mhm,
is someone who is willing to give you their support.
mhm,
You want to make sure that it's as easy for them as possible to do so, and you remove those barriers. So if you yourself
mhm.
go through that experience and it's not ideal for you, imagine what it's going to be like for the donors. So put yourself in the donor's shoes and see what that experience is like.
I love that you brought this up, the change of technology and payment options. I'm thinking of our co-host, Mitch Stein, who's involved with, the new technology of transferring funds out of DAFs and that
Mm,
add-on product that that you're starting to see, which just opens up the door to so many other things. But this is something you would have to go back to your site and, to your point, figure out what does it look like and how is it working. I think that one of my favorite things is I have the Judy Patrick test method, and I always think of my mom who's in her early 80s, and it's like if I can give my mom, a debit card, a credit card, sit next to her and see what her experience is as she uses that function, you can learn a lot, right? And I think that that's something we don't do. We don't test our own applications in this way. And wow, that is just we will never know the opportunity that we lost, right? We just won't know.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that too. Because great point, right? Not just yourself, but do you know
No.
someone that's more representative of the types
Yeah.
of donors that you have? And, maybe get their feedback. Sometimes too, when we go through something, we know what the experience should be like. So it's easy for us, but it might not be easy for somebody else.
Right, right. I think that's one of the things. It's the habit of what we think we know and what is more realistic. From your amazing counterpart, Stephen Shattuck, who is no longer with Bloomerang, but he's the one that started on Giving Tuesday, taking $10 donations to several organizations and seeing what happened. And that was one of his measurements he took, was how frictionless is this process? They've driven me to their website. They've engaged me to say I can make a donation digitally, but really, can I? Like, how easy is it? What happens? And that's the starting point, right? That's the door you've got to walk through in order to get this relationship started or allow the relationship to grow. So I love that you brought this up because, like I said to you, this is not one of those things I would have revisited.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's easy to kind of, fall through the cracks. That's why even though there's a bit of a technical aspect and it's somewhat basic still, think of it from the donor experience and make sure it's on your list every year to take a look at.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's like super genius because, again, you use that phrase, set it and forget it. We do that and then we never test it ourselves. We never, do it. And then it takes somebody who's really has time and has tenacity to call up an organization and say, hey, I tried to do this and it didn't work. I think that if you have a problem and there's a fault going on, it could take forever to learn what that is unless somebody actually interfaces with you and points it out. So I love that you said this. Another thing that I want to spend the majority of our time on, because this is something that I thought was fascinating. And again, I think it's more of a best practice year round, but especially at this time of year, you're advising us to make donors' giving statements easily accessible. Okay, got to start with the phrase donors giving statement. Talk to us about this, Diana.
Absolutely. I feel like this is something I talk about every year where we all know we send those year-end tax summaries every year,
Mhm.
but what can we do about it? I've talked about it in the past in terms of it's an opportunity to use your year-end tax summaries as stewardship pieces, right? It's an extra touch point with your donor. But I want to challenge everyone to and think about not just tax summaries, because typically when you talk about tax summaries, it's your financial contribution, but
Mhm.
your supporters give in many different ways. You have people who volunteer, you have people who give indirectly, maybe through donor advised funds, you have people who give in kind. So there's many different ways that your supporters give to your organization. And what I really want people to think about, what we want people to think about is to thank people for the full breadth of their support, right? Whether that's financial support, in kind, whether that's volunteers' hours or indirect giving, those are all forms of giving. And you want to remind the donors that these are the different ways they've supported your organization in the past and inspire the future giving as well. Like
Mhm.
you want to inspire them to keep supporting your organization financially. You want to inspire them to keep volunteering in the future, whatever they give and what combination of those things. You want to acknowledge their full breadth of support to inspire them to keep doing so in the future.
So when you say that, when you talk about inspiration, are you saying we need to drill down on what the actual impact was and use that space that tends to be clinical and produced by the CFO's team and zhuzh it up? Or how do we bridge that? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, there's a couple of ways to think about that too, right? At the very basic level, if I receive a letter at the end of, at the beginning of next year to let me know these are all the ways I've supported financially, on one level, wouldn't it be also nice to see the ways or how many hours I've volunteered with that organization, right? So
Mhm.
just the fact that they're showing me not only did you give this much, but you've also volunteered this many hours, that already signals to me like, oh, I've made a big impact and I've made an impact not just in one way, but in multiple ways. So at the basic level, just by acknowledging all of those forms of giving, putting them all together is very powerful.
Mhm. If you are thinking about this, um, it's presenting this data and you're sharing this information. How do you let that donor know what the value of those volunteer hours are? Or do you step aside from that? Because the US Department of Labor does every year come out with a valuation of what a donor's hourly worth is. I think it's somewhere in the range of like $31, which an hour, which would surprise most people. And if you're technically skilled, like say you're a physician or you're, somebody that is a CPA or an attorney that has a professional designation, that goes up even higher. Do you suggest doing that and going to that level or just keeping it a little bit more broad?
Not necessarily. I would suggest at that point, maybe keep it a little bit more broad
Okay.
because it does vary a little bit based on if there's skill involved. It varies year over year. It also, like, you don't know what that time is worth to your donor. You know,
Oh,
there may be a
yeah.
dollar value associated with it, but really the value for the donor is they're giving you their time. They're not necessarily assigning a dollar amount to that value, but it's really the amount of time that they're giving you. So
Mhm.
just by acknowledging you volunteered 50 hours this year. Wow,
Mhm.
that's almost like an hour a week. That's amazing. Like
Yeah.
I didn't realize I spent that much time with this organization and
Right.
how much joy that time brought to me as well. I wouldn't have kept doing it if it didn't bring me some joy giving that time to the organization as well. So even just that acknowledgement of you volunteered this many hours, that goes a long way. Or maybe, you volunteered 2 hours. It makes me think about, really only 2 hours, but I care so much about this mission. I should make it a point to do more next year. And
Right.
again, it makes the donors think about it. So just that simple acknowledgement of just the number of hours, there's so
Mhm.
much that can come out of it.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of, as we finish up, it leads me to ask you, and I don't know if it's possible for you to do this, but you've got to have some pretty good software that you've, enmeshed into your whole program. You've got to be tracking this more than just that sign-in sheet. And depending on where you're working and what the mission of the organization is, you're going to have some things to sign off on. If you're dealing with minors, if you're dealing with children, if you're dealing with anything that has maybe a HIPAA law, you know, possibility, if you're working in shelter services where there's, disclosure issues. Talk to us, if you can, a little bit about that, because it seems to me that's going to be a missing link for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that is a good point. That's very important, right? We spend a lot of time putting these summaries together. So you really want a system that does all that or most of that for you. So you can
Mhm.
focus on that relationship building, that personalization we talked about earlier. So really, if you have a system that allows you to automatically track these things for you, you have
Mhm.
a system that talks to each other, right? You
Mhm.
might have a system where you have your donor information in one place, your volunteer information in one place. Then you might have to do a little bit of manual work to put that together. So you're really looking to streamline your operations. And what are those systems that we can bring your data together so
Mhm.
that you're less focused on the mechanical work of it and really more focused on the relationship piece?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I love that you brought this up because I feel like we separate the volunteers from the donors. And there are a lot of folks in this country who feel like it should be a completely different database, a completely different relationship, that we should never ask our volunteers for any financial participation or philanthropic investment. And so I really appreciate that you kind of have led us more to a conversation of what I think I'm hearing you say, that, yeah, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. I'm more likely to give to an organization that I've volunteered with before. In fact, a lot of the organizations I support right now, the relationship started with volunteering. That's my favorite way of giving because it really gets allows me to get to know
Mhm.
the organization and get to know the mission. So that's one of my favorite ways to give. Most volunteers are among your most loyal supporters. There may be volunteers that just prefer giving of time, not necessarily financially. Allow them to tell you that, but don't take away the opportunity from people who want to do both.
Right, right. I love it. And I love, your concept is integrate that tracking so that we can know and the donor can know. I loved that you said that. The donor that's like, wow, only 2 hours? I thought I had donated more, or, volunteered more. Or the person is like, holy moly, I was up to 50 hours. Maybe next year I want to make it to 60, or I mean, I can just
Yeah.
see these conversations in a donor's head that we are missing out on. And so fascinating discussion. This has been great. As always, Diana Otero, I love getting into your your nerd brain there and learning from you. Diana is a senior product marketing manager at Bloomerang, our friends at bloomerang.com. You can learn about all the different things that they're doing. They are excellent and marvelous at sharing data and research that they spend a lot of time and money on. And there's no paywall, whether you're a client or not, you can get access to this information. They're always talking about best practices and innovation. And I just can't say enough about going to their site to learn kind of what's cooking, and what you should be looking at. Because as we know, Diana, there's a lot we need to be thinking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, please. Um, as Julia mentioned, this is not just for customers. We want to make sure to lift up everyone in the industry. So please take advantage of these resources.
Yeah, it's really a lot of fun, and it's amazing the resources that you have that touch on all different areas, of managing a successful nonprofit. So, yeah, bloomerang.com, and you can gain access to all of the information, all of the thought leadership that they have. It's well organized and it changes all the time. That's the other thing, Diana. When I go back into your site, I'm always amazed at how much information, and just energy that you're giving to our sector. And so bravo to you and your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, it's been a lot of fun. I want to make sure that we give our gratitude to our presenting sponsors, and they include our friends over at Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, Fundraisers Friday, Your Part-Time Controller, Third Sector Company, and Clear Impact. These are the folks that join us day in and day out. As we end each and every episode, we end with this mantra, and I think it's a good thing for the end of the year. And it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, Diana.